Howdy neighbors! So today we're going to be going over what your options are as far as growing in the ground, raised beds, or using hugelkultur methods, either growing in a mound or using organic material to fill up most of your raised beds before you place the compost and soil and fertilizer on there. Okay, does that sound good? I just want you to know that you do have options. Some people, it's kind of difficult to tell exactly how good your soil is before you get to whatever location you buy. Or if you're renting, then you don't have much of a choice. But you do have choices as to how you deal with it. So first, let's talk about your normal in-ground growing. So if you happen to have some space, let's say in your backyard, somewhere on your property to grow, you're going to want to look at your soil composition. Now the way that you do this is you take just a handful of soil, throw it in a mason jar, fill the rest up with water, shake it, and then leave it to settle for 3 to 5 days. And you'll notice that different layers of sediment settle at different heights, let's say. So your densest is going to be on the bottom until your lightest. You look at that and you can see how much silt, loam, and sand you have. Now you want to have about equal parts, but sometimes they're going to be just really sandy. And for example, we lived in the high desert of Nevada and it was like 95% sand. So in order to deal with that, we had to add a lot of organic material. The reason you need organic material or loam, such as peat moss, is that it holds moisture. So sand, if you just are on the beach, you see the waves come in, they roll over, it goes straight through, there's nothing holding it in. The organic matter is what's going to keep holding it in, or the silt. So if you have a situation where your soil is just sand, it's just rock, here in where we are now in Tennessee, lots of people have really rocky soil or lots of clay. The clay is actually going to keep water from draining it all. So for example, if you're making a pond, you actually want a high level of clay because that's going to hold the water in for your pond. But for growing, it's not ideal. So you're going to need to supplement that soil in order to make it something that has more sand in it, because you actually do want the drainage. If it's just terrible, 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 and you're trying to run a tiller through and it's just rock, 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 or you're trying to do no-till and you can't even get your spade in there, then you're going to want to do either raised beds, or hugelkultur beds, or a combination. So let me first talk about what hugelkultur means, and I'll show you a few pictures. Hugelkultur means mound culture. So you're going to be building up a mound, and it's basically going to look like a mound of just yard waste. You're going to have branches, rounds, you're going to have a layer of leaves over that, and then over that you're going to have at least 6 to 12 inches of soil, and then on top of that you're going to have a layer of mulch because you do want to keep the moisture in, and you're going to be growing into that. So you're literally planting into it. Ideally, it's about a 45-degree slope. I've seen ones like this it's not good. And I've seen them on professional sites and I'm like, who did that? I'm like, who did that? You did it wrong. Just because if you have it like that, you're gonna have so much erosion, nothing, this is pretty much ideal. You have just enough erosion, you're gonna have it, 45 degrees. If you have it like this, you're not, fully taking advantage of the hugelkultur system, something that we use a lot in permaculture. It just, ideally you have your isosceles triangle. So that's hugelkultur. And the reason why I introduce it first is because most of us aren't going to do that. Why? I don't know, it looks it's very rustic, foresty. If you're growing especially and you have like other, if you have traffic that's passing through, you have other people that are going to be seeing your garden, then, and you want it to look neat, or your husband or wife or life partner is like a neat freak, you're gonna have to do raised beds. This is not a bad thing. I love raised beds. We have all raised beds inside the greenhouse. I have 4 raised beds out here. I would do all raised beds because the pros are, one, you don't have to bend down as far, right? You can have a 32-inch raised bed. You're just reaching out and grabbing things, no problem. You can have a 17-inch raised bed. That's what we have out here, and we have the 32-inch ones inside. You can have a mix depending on what you're growing, you know, why you're using a raised bed. You can have different heights. You can buy pre-made kits. The ones that we have are made of corrugated metal. They're from Vigo Gardens, and powder-coated galvanized metal. And they hold up really well. They're designed with internal struts for those lengths and widths and dimensions that need it. And they come with a little rubber gasket on top, so it's not sharp on top. They're super easy to install. We had our grandpa helping us out, and he only cursed like 2 times during the whole thing, so that's like a miracle. And they're really lightweight, so you can move them around. It's not a problem. You build them somewhere, move them somewhere else. But of course, if you're making them for, you know, if you're doing an 8-foot wide one, 32-inch that's going into your greenhouse, you're gonna make it in the greenhouse. You can't make it outside and then bring it inside. So raised beds are great. Back to why I mentioned hugelkultur. You're going to be, if it's a big bed, if you got 32 inches or bigger, that's a lot of soil. Soil is not cheap, especially organic soil is not anywhere close to cheap. So you're gonna wanna fill at least half of it, probably 2/3. We're getting up to 3/4 in some of them with organic material. So how do you do that? Well, for those of us with property with trees, extra trees, we're thinning out our property all the time. You have undergrowth that you don't want. You're going through there with some sort of brush hog or forestry cutting device. Then you're taking those logs, those rounds, those branches, those leaves, everything, you're throwing it in there. And you want to be kind of organized about it because you want the bigger pieces on the bottom, branches on the top, leaves, and then your material, your growing medium on the top of that. And for inside of a greenhouse, it's not going to be so important that you're mulching for weed control or for moisture retention, but outside you definitely want to mulch. Hugel-ish, so it's not the hugel part, because it's not the mound, but it is the culture part of the hugelkultur that you're going to be using organic material, trees. You know, the more rotten it is, as long as it doesn't have any sort of bug infestation, the better. And you're going to be filling up your raised beds. 2/3 of the way, 3/4 of the way. You want at least 6 inches of dirt. That's where you're going to be planting into there. If you're growing something that's going to have a large taproot, you might want to go more than that. And there you go. So I would say do raised beds for everything. They even have ones that are more raised because they have a clear area underneath. Like you see these cedar kind of tray ones, and you can put up to 1 foot of dirt in there, and that's not a problem. And that'll raise them up even more. And they look really neat. They look really tidy. Cedar is a beautiful wood to use. But those are going to be also cost prohibitive for some people. So you just have to think about that before you get into it. We got in-ground growing. We've got raised bed growing. We have hugelkultur methods in our raised beds. We don't have hugelkultur berms or mounds per se, but when we do plant around our trees and we're using, and we have extra material, we like to incorporate that into the dirt so it can break down over time and increase the nutrition that's in the dirt. So there are a couple caveats that I'm going to mention. Another option for plants, if you specifically need to break up clay soil, is something with a deep taproot. So burdock fits into this category, and you can use it as a medicinal. It's going to actually grow down into the soil and break it up. It's like a little drill. So you can do that. You can grow that sort of thing to break it up if you're not going to be if you're choosing not to till. So taking the time to amend the soil naturally is one way. You can also amend it artificially naturally, which just means adding the specific component that you need to make it better soil. So if it's too sandy, you want to add some loam, some compost, something that's going to break down over time and help with the moisture retention. If there's too much clay, you're going to want to add sand. And all around, you always want to add compost anyway, because that's always going to be something that's beneficial. So that's what you can do for in-ground growing. I have 2 minutes left. For raised beds, you can build them yourself. So you can source free materials. You can use pallets. You can use leftover fencing. I've seen people do that. Corrugated metal that you've pulled off of an old barn. Anything that's just going to keep a shape. Of course, you're going to have to use some sort of internal structure if it's past I think it's like 4 feet wide. You don't want it to bow out or in. So you want an internal stretch. So just remember if you're doing that. Last. So for raised beds, it's going to take a little bit more time because you have to build them. And it's going to cost a little bit more because you have to pay for materials. Very few of us have just extra building materials laying around, but you never know. You can price it out at different, the rehabitat places that they have. And you're going to have to also buy the soil and everything that goes into it. But you can offset the cost if you fill it mostly with organic material, yard waste from your yard or neighbors' yards, or sometimes the city is giving away, mulch or something. You could do that. Lastly, for hugelkultur methods, you want a whole season for it to settle. You can't make it and it's going to be perfect. Okay? So you're not going to weekend, first weekend of April, build a hugelkultur mound, and then it's going to be ready to go the next weekend. It just takes time for it to settle down. Now, it's not going to kill you. It's not going to kill you. It might kill your plants, but it's not going to kill you to plant a bunch of stuff and have it not work out, or some of them are going to work out, or some of them are going to do kind of well, but then they'll come back the next year really awesome because they self-seed, or they have roots that are really strong and they'll just be in there. So it's not going to hurt you to build the hugelkultur bed and then plant in it immediately, but you're not going to have the best of results. So, sorry if I'm using my hand. I'm trying to figure out how many hands to use. You're not going to have the best of results until it's had time to settle down. It's literally going to settle down. This is the same thing with when you're using the hugelkultur method inside of the raised beds. After a year, it's going to be a few inches down. And that's a good thing, because that means that that material is decomposing. So those are your options. You have in the ground, raised bed, hugelkultur mound, hugelkultur inside of a raised bed, kind of. I'm sure someone would disagree with that. But you can always grow no matter where you are. In the book, I do have more examples for containers. I like to think of raised beds as just big containers, but of course containers have their own restrictions, but they also have their own, you could put them anywhere. You can't put like a raised bed like in the middle of your living room. I mean, I guess, if that's your thing. And it's like, Becky with the raised bed in her living room. You could do it if you want, but I'm just saying, containers. Way more movable, pretty options. You can't grow everything in a container, but you can grow a lot of stuff in containers. And you have the flexibility of moving it in and out of your house for the wintertime. So you can overwinter things, so you're more likely to have, if you have something that's like a tender perennial, you can keep it and forever. You don't have to worry about it. Potting it into a different plant, moving it outside during the winter time, or helping it stay dormant, and then moving it back outside, you just don't have that problem. All right, so sorry I'm rambling, but this is something that I'm really super into. I will insert some pictures, videos, and if you want more information, if you want a slower pace at your own reading leisure, go ahead and purchase my book, Gardening with Kids. It's available on Amazon. It's available as an ebook. And soon we'll be getting it onto Ingram Spark for the bookstores. But that's like an inside bookstore thing. All right. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Feel free to like and subscribe, and have a wonderful day.